Let the big battle continue. This is Big Nation. Let's get this party started.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
We covered one Big Ten versus Big 12 matchup on Tuesday's show. That's Cyhawk, Iowa taking on Iowa State. But there are two other Big Ten versus Big 12 matchups to cover. And here's the thing about the Big 12 opponents that each one of these Big Ten teams are facing. They're good Big 12 teams. Iowa State, Kansas, Colorado. Now, here's the thing about the Big 12. There's about 10 or 11 teams that can contend for the conference title outside of maybe Houston and Cincinnati, right? There's a lot of teams in the Big 12 that could go 6-6. They could go 9-3. They could go 10-2. They could go 7-5. But that's the beauty of that conference. We're talking, of course, here, Big Ten. I am Big Ten Ted. You can find me on Twitter at Big Ten Ted. Over there on Spotify, that's where you find all of the audio goodness, Big Ten Ted, over there in the search bar. And, of course, on YouTube, the OG platform here of Big Ten Ted. Make sure you subscribe so you know when Big Nation is coming at you here. So, big matchups between two big conferences, and we are going to touch on two more of them, preview two more of them in this particular show. Welcome to Big Nation 6. We have now made it through 3 weeks of Big Nation, folks, and it is going, I think, really, really good. Thank you for all of the feedback that you've certainly given me, and it's been really fun putting on these shows for you. Now we're getting into the heart of the season. Now we're talking ball. And that's what we love, of course, here at this particular network. All right, before I get into the game plan, I want to have a quick programming note on Big Nation. Now, like a head coach, I got to make adjustments in game. And I feel like this is a sort of in-game adjustment. The Thursday show is going to change a little bit, but it will still be on Thursday, and it will still be at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. But the Tuesday show will be moving to Monday, and it's going to be surrounded by, we're going to be talking a lot about the reaction of what happened over the weekend. We're going to go more in depth than just my Saturday instant reaction. So that's going to be kind of the format of the Monday show. Thursday, it will be picks and previews on the Thursday show as well. So that's going to be a format that we're going to move to starting after this weekend. So make sure you tune in for both the Monday shows and Thursday shows. 7 p.m. Eastern is the start of both of those. Let's get into the game plan here, what we're drawing up for you on this edition of Big Nation. We're going to be talking to Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck, a part of the On3 Network. We're going to be talking about those Oregon issues, and they got a game against Boise State in which they haven't won. 0-3 versus the Broncos, the Ducks are. So we're going to be talking how they can fix those issues, right? Getting off to a little bit of a slow, sluggish start against the Idaho Vandals. How can they be Idaho State champions, beating the Vandals and Broncos in back-to-back weeks? So we're going to be talking to our guy, Jay Hop, later on here during the show as well. We're going to be previewing two Big 10 versus Big 12 matchups, Illinois and Kansas, Nebraska and Colorado, a couple of Saturday prime time matchups. And then I'm going to be chatting underrated games. You know, this is a great weekend for Fox, CBS, NBC, right? Michigan, Texas at big noon. Cyhawk in the mid-afternoon on CBS. Primetime, Nebraska, Colorado. This is what this TV deal was really formed for. This is the kind of lineup that you wanted to see throughout those big three. But there are some games to certainly watch out for, whether it's teams on upset alert or just intriguing games in general, underrated games outside of the big three that you need to have your eye on in this week of Big Ten football. Before we get into all of that, I want to shine some spotlights. And this is probably going to become a weekly occurrence. I want to take one more look back to week one. I've got a group of players that I want to name my week one Warriors. Our week by week Warriors segment will be on the Monday show going forward, but I wanted to take a look at these guys because I got 3 players that I really want to shine a spotlight on that if they continue to play at a high level, that could possibly help their team win a few more ball games down the road. Let's start first with the Maryland Terrapins. There were big questions at the quarterback position coming into the season. Was it going to be MJ Morris? Was it going to be Cameron Edge? Nope. And nope. It's going to be Billy Edwards. Billy Edwards had a great week one showing to kick off the season. And when I really look into that film, and when I really watch his performance against UConn, he just looked really comfortable and he just looked really confident. And I'm going to say that about a few other quarterbacks during this show as well. Billy Edwards just seemed very familiar with the system, which makes a lot of sense because he's the one that's been in this system for years. MJ Morris, a little bit of a newbie. We know that. So for Billy to come in and play like he did shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody. The early money on this quarterback battle was on MJ Morris. But if Billy can continue to play like this, 20 of 27, completing nearly 75% of his passes, 311 yards and 2 touchdowns, if he can continue to play like that, this is a Maryland team that if they can answer that quarterback question, they rely on the best defense of the Mike Locksley era, and they got weapons. It's Maryland. Okay, Ty Felton, Caden Prather, Octavian Smith, Roman Hemby. How about Nolan Ray as well in the backfield, which if you were paying attention to Maryland football throughout the spring, if you were following our guy Ahmed Gafir, okay, we had him on for our preview for the Maryland. If you were following his coverage from inside the black and gold through the spring and then into the fall, Nolan Ray's emergence should not surprise you at all. This is a Maryland team that if they have confidence at the quarterback position, they have weapons across the offense that can make plays, and they have a really good defense to rely on. So if Billy continues to play at that high of a level, this is a Maryland team that could certainly get a few more wins, maybe even more than my predicted 6-6 record for them this season. Let's move on from the East Coast to the West Coast, man. Jonah Coleman, the transfer running back coming in from Arizona, following Jed Fish from the desert up to the Pacific Northwest. And man, this guy is a load to bring down. And he appears to maybe be the focal point of this Washington Huskies offense. And that really makes me maybe like them a little bit more. It provides them with a good amount of balance in this offense right now. Against Weber State, didn't carry the ball a whole lot, but they got ahead pretty early and then they were able to put the game away and get some of their depth in later on. 16 carries, 127 yards, and 3 touchdowns for Jonah Coleman. And if he becomes the focal point of this offense, I think it just has a domino effect to make the Huskies more successful this season, because if they can establish that run game, I think it makes things easier for Will Rogers throwing the football down the field. It creates better matchups for a weapon like Denzel Boston down the field. If Jeremiah Hunter did not get involved in the passing game against Weber State, but you got to have a feeling that he is going to get involved as the season goes along. Of course, Giles Jackson as well. So my big concern for Washington coming into this season were the lines. I predicted the Huskies to go 6-6 because of what they were replacing up front. If this offensive line can do enough to be able to get Jonah Coleman to that 1,000-yard level, that could maybe get Washington to that 7-win level, to that 8-win level. You know, when you combine everything about the Washington Huskies, okay, if this is all going to work out, if Jonah Coleman, right, is going to be their stud back, and if Cam Davis is able to allow them to have a good amount of depth as well. I already mentioned what's that quarterback, what's that wide receiver. And then you look at that defense. Like, they've got a really good secondary back there, and then guys like Alfonso Tupatala, guys like Carson Bruner, Void Tanufi as well in that front seven. If the front seven comes together, and even if this is a middle-of-the-road Big Ten defense, you combine it with that offense, if the offensive line takes step up, and even if this offensive line is average to above average, this is a Washington team that could be scary to play, especially if you play them at the greatest setting in college football in Seattle. Washington is a team to watch out for. Maybe not getting a ton of national press right now, but they're a team to watch out for. If they can build upon these early season favorable matchups against the Eastern Michigans of the world, against the Washington States of the world, if they can beat Northwestern and they can get 3 wins in a row, they can get 4 wins in a row. They play Rutgers on the road on a Friday night. If they can keep building confidence and building momentum and keep getting better when they get maybe to the more difficult part of their schedule, this is a Washington team that really excites me about their future. Let's head over to Piscataway. We're going from east to west, and now we're back to the East Coast, talking about the Rutgers defense and Dariel Jabome. Boy, there were big questions about Muhammad Toure being out for the season, Tyrene Powell being out for that first game. We'll see if he's available for the second game, this third game, when exactly Tyrene Powell is going to be back. Who's going to be able to step up into the middle of that Rutgers defense? Well, I think the question was fairly answered because Dariel Jabome was just around the football at all times against the Howard Bison. 14 tackles, 5 solo, 9 assisted in that game. And was it going to be Moses Walker? Was it going to be somebody else? I think this game really put Dariel Jabome in the driver's seat to play alongside Tyrene Powell in the middle of that Rutgers defense. Now, Dariel might not provide that great pass rushing threat that Muhammad Toure provided, but when you talk about finding the football, especially defending the run game, Dariel Jabome can certainly step up and make those plays. He showed a great nose for the football. I remember one drive, I think Howard went 3 and out. I think there was a run to the left side, maybe a short pass, and then another run. He found the football in different parts of the field, in different parts of what the offense was doing. He found it every single play. And that's what you love to see from a kid coming in, next man up type of mentality to be able to fill that void. You combine him with Tyrene Powell. Is he Muhammad Toure? Probably not. A lot of people aren't Muhammad Toure, but it certainly is a pretty darn good backfill option right there for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Everybody's got their eye on those big 3 matchups on Fox, CBS, and NBC this weekend, rightfully so. Texas and Michigan at big noon, Iowa State Cy-Hawk rivalry in the mid-afternoon on CBS, and of course in prime time, that Nebraska-Colorado rivalry renewed matchup as well. But there's some underrated matchups this week in the Big Ten that I really want to touch on, that maybe you want to turn your television to the FS1s and the Big Ten networks of the world to really watch these matchups as well. I want to first start with the Wisconsin Badgers. Look, they were not impressive in week number 1 against the Western Michigan Broncos. Now, what was one area where the Wisconsin Badgers struggled in week number 1? It was their defensive line. It was their defensive front. There were parts in that game where Western Michigan was able to establish themselves at the line of scrimmage and push around the Badgers up front. Losing James Thompson Jr. on that defensive line, I think was a big loss, because I think that was already probably the weak point of that Wisconsin defense, and a defensive line that didn't have a ton of depth. Now, you bring in the University of South Dakota, an FCS team, but they have Dakota in their name. And I think the rules are that if you have Dakota in your name, you got to at least be ranked in the FCS rankings. This is the number 6th ranked team in the FCS. This is a very good FCS team. This is an FCS team that returns a lot from last season. And here's the point that I want to compare to as to what I led off this particular segment with when I talked about Western Michigan and what they were able to do up front on their offensive line. South Dakota returns 4 of 5 starters from last season, and this is a team that is focused on running the football. Of those 4 starters, they are all 6'4", 310 pounds or larger. These are some big boys up front for the Coyotes. These are some boys that are going to look to road grade downhill against this Wisconsin defensive line. So that is going to be a challenge for Wisconsin. What are we going to find out about the Badgers in this game? We're going to find out if Wisconsin can be pushed around 2 weeks in a row by teams that aren't power conference teams. And if that happens again, even if it's not for the entire game, because I don't think it happened in the entire game against Western Michigan, but it happened enough where it was concerning. If that happens, and then Alabama, even if Wisconsin wins by 15 or 20 points, but if that happens and Alabama comes into town with one of the best offensive lines in the entire country, that could spell doom. That could maybe spell disaster in that big noon Saturday matchup in week number 3 for the Wisconsin Badgers. South Dakota. Here's the interesting thing about South Dakota. ESPN's SP Plus actually ranks South Dakota as a better/higher team than Western Michigan. Now, you can take that however you want it, but Bill Conley's SP Plus said that about the Yotes as compared to the Broncos. So you kind of put those teams side by side. There's a potential that the Badgers could have another battle on their hands. South Dakota has a really good running back tandem, Charles Pierre Jr. and Travis Tice as well. They combine for 25 carries, 222 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Aiden Bauman, the son of Todd Bauman, is the quarterback for their team, a kid from the state of Minnesota. I think he was formerly committed to Iowa State, so they've got a capable quarterback as well. What I want to see from Wisconsin, all of that being considered, I still want to see Luke Fickell and this Wisconsin team have the killer instinct. I want to see them be a lot better on the offensive side of the football. This is a decent South Dakota defense as well. But I want to see them, because they had long drives against Western Michigan last week. You need to be able to finish drives. Have the killer instinct. Finish with touchdowns. Defense needs to play better against a tough, physical team up front like South Dakota. I want to see improvement. I want to see, hey, maybe we got shocked a little bit. Maybe we weren't ready for week 1. Now that we've seen that, we have a dominant performance in week number 2 that builds confidence going up into that week number 3 against Alabama. If they have a similar performance like they did against Western Michigan, I'm not going to lie. Alabama could run them off the field, and they could run them off the field pretty darn quick in Madison the very next week. Let's head first to the very first Big Ten game of this 2024 college football season. The Michigan State Spartans going on the road to College Park to take on the Maryland Terrapins. The Terps, 8.5-point home favorites. You can catch this one 3:30 Eastern on Big Ten Network. Boy, this is the battle of two teams that look pretty different in week number 1. I covered it early on in my week 1 Warriors, talking about Billy Edwards and how he was able to protect the football, how he was efficient, get it to his playmakers, and put 50 points on the board. This Maryland team did in week number 1 against the Connecticut Huskies. I look at Michigan State. This is a team that continuously turned the football over. This is a team that allowed Florida Atlantic to continue to hang with them and hang with them and hang with them. When you compare these two teams that Michigan State and Maryland played in week number 1, UConn is the 130th ranked team at F+, which combines Bill Conley's SP Plus and FEI. Florida Atlantic, 101st. FEI, they were closer together. So you look at how Maryland was able to dominate their opponent, and then you look how Michigan State was not able to dominate, certainly, their opponent as well. And both of these teams are in the hundreds. Okay? How much you want to separate these two teams, that's up to you. I'm not, of course, the expert on Husky football or Owls football, but against maybe two comparable-ish opponents, Maryland was able to boat race theirs. Michigan State kept on allowing the Owls to hang in this football game. I think this could be a big swing game for Michigan State. And I touched on this in Tuesday's show, where if you lose to Maryland and then you lose on the road at Boston College in a couple of weeks, you've got a very tough 4-game stretch coming up after that. The likes of Iowa in there, Michigan's in there, Oregon's in there, Ohio State is in there. All of a sudden, you could be staring 2-6 in the face in the month of November, and then where's your psyche at that point in time? You look at this on the flip side for the Maryland Terrapins. If they're able to win this football game, their schedule is very favorable early in the season to continue to build that confidence of a football team, and specifically build the confidence of quarterback Billy Edwards. I thought Joe Rossi had this Michigan State defense looking better last week. So I'm very curious to see that matchup, to see how many explosive plays Maryland can get on this Michigan State defense. If Aiden Childs can protect the football, I think that this could be a very close game when all is said and done. Let's go to Friday night on FS1. The Duke Blue Devils taking on the Northwestern Wildcats. I think that this is going to be a fun matchup. I think that this is going to be an interesting matchup, certainly. I think the big question for me, I really like Northwestern's defense and what they were able to show week 1 against Miami of Ohio. I just really like the way it's constructed, and I really trust David Braun to put a really good defense on the field. Can Northwestern's defense limit Malik Murphy's ability to throw the football down the field? Murphy threw for 291 yards and 2 scores in the season opener against Elon. I think that this is going to be a very competitive game. I think that this could be a close game down the stretch. Two teams that may need this victory to be bowl eligible at the end of the season. And the Vegas line, I think, tells the entire story. Northwestern, 2.5 home favorites. I think that Martin Stadium on the banks of Lake Michigan at night, I think it's going to look a little bit better during the day with the blue Lake Michigan in the background. But at night, I think it's going to make for a pretty cool atmosphere as well. It's going to be a really fun weekend of Big Ten versus Big 12 matchups. And the first one that I want to talk about here is the Illinois Fighting Illini hosting the Kansas Jayhawks on Saturday night. Of course, you rewind back to last year's game in Lawrence, Kansas was able to go up and down and up and down one more time and up and down the field. They were explosive on offense, and Illinois had a really hard time stopping them up and down the field. Now, there's a lot of things that are similar about this year's matchup, about last year's matchup, but including the location, there are some things that are pretty different, specifically about this Illinois Fighting Illini team. Kansas has a very similar makeup that they did last season, and I think the keys to victory for Illinois are pretty similar on the defensive side of the ball, how they have to defend Kansas, but I think there's parts of this Illinois offense and the environment about this game that could favor the Illinois Fighting Illini. So let's dive right into it. It is the first sellout at Memorial Stadium in Champaign since 2016 in that night atmosphere, 7 p.m. Eastern on FS1. Illinois, a 6.5 home dog against Kansas. And orange out, you gotta think the Illini faithful are going to be rowdy for this one, with the Jayhawks looking to get revenge considering what happened last season. And I think the first key to victory and the first talking point that I really want to chat about in this Kansas-Illinois preview is fairly obvious. How do you slow down Kansas's offense? How do you prevent 2023 Part 2? How do you prevent this Jayhawks offense from going up and down the field? That's the big question, because Jalen Daniels is back. Jalen Daniels can do it with his arm. Jalen Daniels can certainly create problems with his mobility. He was able to do that last season in this particular football game. So how does Illinois contain that? I think the defensive game plan from Aaron Henry and how he approaches this game is certainly going to be interesting, because if you're able to say, hey, we got to be able to get pressure, we got to get in the face of Jalen Daniels, I think if you do that and this pressure isn't strategic and this pressure isn't contained, I think he can break the pocket and he can also hurt you with his legs. So how he schemes up that pressure, I think could maybe sway this game potentially one way or another, because if you cannot contain Jalen Daniels' running ability, he can certainly hurt you in that way as well. But it doesn't stop with Jalen Daniels. They've got two really good running backs as well, and this front this defensive line for Illinois, this linebacking core for Illinois, this run defense for the Illini, I certainly think will be tested. You look at Devin Neal, who rushed for over 1,000 yards last season. Daniel Highshaw as well, combined for 178 yards, 3 touchdowns in a week 1 game over Lindenwood. So that's the thing I think that makes Kansas dangerous, is not only can they throw the ball over the top and create explosive plays, but if they are able to do that and there's less guys up in the box and you have to worry about the downfield threat, now all of a sudden there are gaping holes to run through. And I think you saw that in last year's matchup as well. The run game was very effective against this Illinois front. And that was an Illinois front that had guys like Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph. They don't have that this year. Got to answer some questions about the defensive line. That's the big group. I feel good about their linebacking core. I'm feeling better about this Illinois secondary. Can they get enough of a push on this defensive line to try to contain this run game as well? We talked about the downfield passing threats for the Kansas Jayhawks in that game. You got to be able to keep some of these guys in check. Lawrence Arnold, Luke Grimm had over 100 yards receiving and a score in week number 1 against Lindenwood. So you put this all together, and Illinois needs to try to find a way to contain this. And I said I feel better about their secondary. I'm curious if I am still going to feel better about their secondary when this game is all said and done, because I think there is the potential for Kansas to move the ball up and down the field. But I'm going to say this, I think, about a lot of games this week. Illinois has got to find a way to try to limit some of those explosive plays for Kansas down the field. Because if they can do a variety of things, if they can throw the ball, the run lane's open. If they can run the ball, the throw lane's open. So Illinois has to be disciplined in how they defend this game. But can Gabe Akers, right, have a big game? That's the big thing. Coming off the edge, I think he could. I think he's really good coming off the edge of that defensive line over there. So if he can wreak havoc, he can get into the backfield a lot. I think that helps the rest of this Illini defense as well, certainly. Now let's look at the other side of the football, because I think this is where you start to get advantageous matchups for the Illinois Fighting Illini. And I think this Illinois offense certainly is looking pretty good. You look at what Luke Altmaier was able to do in week number 1, and I said it earlier in the week. I think he's just playing with a lot more confidence in the passing game this season, and you really saw that on display against Eastern Illinois in week number 1. When you look at this Kansas defense, okay, they are 77th in the country in DF+, that analytical measure as well. I think when you look at the matchup against Illinois' offensive line against the front 7 of the Kansas Jayhawks, I think this is an Illinois team that can run the football. Okay, when you look, I know this isn't the premier game in the primetime slot, but you're playing a ranked team at home, sellout crowd, national television on FS1 in front of a pretty sizable national audience. Caden Fagan could have his breakout game in this one. I could very well see it, because Illinois' ability to run the football is not only going to keep their offense moving, is not only going to keep their offense a lot more balanced, but if you can control that time of possession, it keeps the greatest weapon of Kansas on the field, and that's Jalen Daniels in that offense. I think Illinois has a good offensive line. I think they've got a really good running back right there in Caden Fagan. And if he can have that 150, 170-yard type of performance, I think that could help Illinois in so many different ways in this particular matchup. Let's move to Illinois pushing the football down the field. The strength of the Kansas defense is in the secondary right now. You got really experienced players. You've got 4 seniors back there, guys that have been in the system, guys that have been in the scheme, guys that are able to create turnovers and have proven to be able to create turnovers as well. You've got Kobe Bryant back there. How about Mello Dotson, a preseason first-team All-Big 12, getting some All-American looks as well. He led the team in interceptions last season, and I want to focus on that. Illinois, limit turnovers. The last thing that you want to do is give this Kansas offense a short field. You need to make Kansas go 80 yards down the field, 70 yards down the field. You need to force Kansas into long drives, protecting the football. If Illinois is able to win the turnover battle, and in exchange they get some short fields and they're able to force some turnovers on this from this Kansas offense on their defense, I think that certainly plays into their favor as well. Let's talk about this crowd. I mentioned it at the top of this preview. The first sellout in Champaign since 2016. 8 years. Get this crowd rowdy. Get them into the game early. Have them be a factor. Because if you can go down the field and get that early score and get that early lead and establish that early in the game, and now you get the crowd behind you as well. You get to a 3rd and 7. You get to a 3rd and 8. Oh, I can't hear what's happening in my helmet, right? You get pressure. You get that big stop, and now you build upon that, and the crowd gets louder and louder and louder and gets into it. You need to use the crowd, right? I'm going to borrow a saying from Texas A&M and the Seattle Seahawks. You need to get the crowd into it as that 12th man to have that extra advantage in this particular football game for Illinois. If the Illini are able to win this football game, this is a ranked Kansas team. This is a Kansas team that is a contender to get to the Big 12 championship game. This is a Kansas team that a lot of people respect nationally. If Illinois is able to get this win, I think it just speaks to the depth of the Big Ten. Because when I look at Illinois, is this a team that's a top 7, even a top 8 football team in the Big Ten? Maybe not. I mean, maybe they could be, but right now, maybe not. But if a mid-tier Big Ten team can beat a ranked Big 12 team like this, I think it speaks a lot to where the Big Ten is depth-wise, and in a year where Brett Bielema really needs to start turning this thing around, this would be a big marquee victory for Bert and the Illini in this particular matchup. It should be a fun matchup. It should be an interesting matchup. I know a lot of people are going to be looking at Nebraska, Colorado, including myself during this time slot. But if you have a second TV, if you have a laptop available, you might want to tune to FS1. Did we save the best for last? Well, that's up for you to decide. Let's move on to our last Big Ten preview of the week. The Nebraska Cornhuskers hosting the Colorado Buffaloes. Big Ten Saturday night on NBC. The eyes of the nation are going to be on this matchup as Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes bring all that hype after squeaking by North Dakota State into what will be an absolutely raucous environment in front of yet another sellout crowd in Lincoln, Nebraska. Boy, this is going to be an incredible atmosphere, and I think that this is going to be a really, really good football game that everybody's going to have their eye on. Can Nebraska win a marquee football game? I know Colorado won just 4 games last season, but we know that hype train is coming into Lincoln, Nebraska. Whoever comes out on top in this particular matchup is going to be riding that hype train here the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe the rest of the season as well. All right, let's dive into this matchup. Let's start to break it down a little bit. I think there's one big key for the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and it's when the Huskers are on the defensive side of the ball. I look at both of these teams, 85 through 85. Nebraska has a much deeper team. Nebraska has a much more complete team. But Colorado can still hang with them. Colorado can still win this football game because of their star power at the top. When I look at this Colorado football team, it reminds me a lot of when in the summer of 2010, when LeBron James left the Cleveland Cavaliers to join the Miami Heat. You had LeBron, you had Wade, you had Bosh, you had that super team, that super group at the top. But what happened when you got beyond that big three? All of a sudden, you got a lot of Joel Anthonys and Udonis Haslams and Mario Chalmers and guys like that. And this Colorado team is very similar to that. You've got a lot of star power at the top. Sheduer Sanders, one of the very best quarterbacks in college football. Whether you love him, whether you absolutely despise him, you cannot deny his talent. You can also not deny the talent of Travis Hunter, the two-way star on the outside at corner and wide receiver. There is a tremendous amount of star power at the top of Colorado. Now you get beyond that star power, you start to get some question marks. More on that in just a little bit. But Nebraska needs to limit big plays down the field. Nebraska needs to find a way to contain the combination of Sheduer Sanders and Travis Hunter. You look at Colorado's season opener against North Dakota State. NDSU was able to hang with them, but the difference in that football game was Colorado's ability to create explosive plays down the field involving this combination. And we saw it last year. Okay, when Sheduer Sanders was one of the most hit and contacted quarterbacks in the country because of a porous offensive line, when you're able to disrupt Sheduer, when you're able to disrupt the passing game for Colorado, you can have a lot of success against the Colorado Buffaloes. So if I'm Tony White, if I'm drawing up a defensive game plan in this game, I look at them and says, this isn't a great run game. Okay, if the throw game isn't working, they can't all of a sudden go to the well and go to this run game, whether it's Dallin Hayden or whoever it is in the backfield. They can't all of a sudden go to that and say, hey, we're going to pound the rock. Because Nebraska has a tremendous advantage in the trenches on both sides, but we're talking about their defense. On the defensive line versus Colorado's offensive line. So they need to find a way to keep those big plays in check. Not only the big deep passing plays where the ball goes 30 yards or 40 yards in the field, or down the field, but also those short passing concepts where they try to get Travis Hunter or Jimmy Horn on the other side, where they try to get them in space. 3, 5, 7 yards separated from the nearest defensive back, and Travis Hunter can be real slippery. Jimmy Horn can catch the ball and run with it and create 15, 20, 25-yard chunk plays down the field. That's what they need to be able to tackle in space. That's Colorado in a nutshell. Get it to our athletes and let them put up some points. If that is contained, or if they can't do that, Colorado doesn't have more bullets in the holster, so to speak. That's their bullet. Now, their bullet's pretty darn good. It's a very high-level bullet when you talk about it in college football. So Nebraska's ability to be able to contain that is a key for them to be able to walk out of Memorial Stadium with a big marquee victory when it comes down to it. North Dakota State in that season opener against Colorado, they were able to push around this Colorado team and kind of flipping over now to the other side of the football. This is a defense that, is the offensive line Colorado improved a little bit? Yeah, sure, you could say that. Is the defense improved a little bit? Maybe, but this is still a defense that Nebraska, they can push them around. Okay, North Dakota State, they can push them around. Nebraska can do that up front. And when I look at Nebraska on the offensive side of the football, considering what Colorado's defense is, man, I look at that game against UTEP, and I saw not one, not two, not three, but 4 running backs able to get into the game and be productive. RTFB is printed on a t-shirt sold by our good buddy John Johnston over there at Coordination. I'm going to replace the F with maybe another letter of a word that is very familiar to Nebraska fans. Run the damn ball. Run the football up the middle. Colorado can't stop you. They can't. Nebraska has a tremendous advantage in the trenches. And I think the key is maybe not necessarily leaning on one of these guys, although I think almost any of these guys could have a really big game. Keep these running backs fresh. Expose the depth that you have and the depth that they don't. I started at the top of this preview. I said, they've got really high-end talent. Colorado has better high-end talent at quarterback and some of the Travis Hunter, right, than Nebraska does. But once you get down to the rest of the 83 guys, Nebraska just plain and simple has more depth and they have better depth than the Colorado Buffaloes, Nebraska running the football, whether it's Dante Dowdle, whether it's Emmett Johnson, whether it's Ramir Johnson, whether it's Gabe Irvin Jr., the ability to wear down Colorado, hands on hips. You want to see those hands on the hips of Colorado defenders, mid third quarter, late third quarter, early fourth quarter, that's when you know that you have done your job. Colorado's defense. I wish I could take credit for this stat. I can't. I was watching some CBS sports programming earlier in the week, and I got to give them credit for this one. Colorado's defense has given up 400 plus yards in 10 of the last 13 games. In last year's game, it was all about turnovers. Nebraska was able to move the football down the field early in the game, but missed field goals and fumbles did them in, and then Colorado was able to just run away with it in the second half. If this team is able to protect the football, I mentioned their physicality up front in running the football, and then Dylan Raiola over the top. I can see this clear as day from many miles, country miles down I-80 through the heart of Nebraska. Run, run, short pass. Run, run, medium pass. Run, run, deep ball. I think this is a game where Jalen Lloyd is going to get a big play. We didn't see Jalen Lloyd in that game against UTEP, but he has some track speed down the field. He has the ability to get over the top. When Nebraska is able to pound the rock and run the football and exercise their depth and continuously stay fresh in the run game, and Colorado's like, we got to dedicate resources. We got to bring up guys. Dylan Raiola throws an absolutely gorgeous deep ball down the field. And Jalen Lloyd can outrun probably anybody on the Colorado secondary. I think that's the key. Establishing the run game is going to open up Dylan Raiola's ability to push the ball down the field. And the more you're able to run the football, the more you're able to control the line of scrimmage and control that time of possession. It keeps the one threat of the Colorado Buffaloes on the sidelines. And that's Sheduer Sanders, and that's Travis Hunter. The less they can be on the field, the less opportunity that the Colorado Buffaloes have to win this football game. Like, I look at the depth of Nebraska at some of these positions. Now, when you look at offensive line, when you look at quarterback, when you look at wide receiver, when you look at running back, do you see some of the best players at their respective position in the Big Ten? I don't. There's better offensive lines than Nebraska in the Big Ten. There's better running backs in the Big Ten than what's at Nebraska, wide receivers. But now there's good to really good players, and there's a lot of them at those specific positions, specifically running back and wide receivers. You know, Johnson, Dowdell, Irvin. I talked about that at the running back position. You look at wide receiver. I think this is a Nebraska team that now has legit threats down the field. I talked about Jalen Lloyd, but of course, those first two guys, Isaiah Nair and Jamal Banks. I got a feeling that Travis Hunter is going to match up against Isaiah Nair. I think that's going to open things up. I mentioned Jalen Lloyd down the field. Jamal Banks, I think, could have a good big game down the field as well. Ja'Cory Barney, Janarian Bonner, Bullock. How about true freshman Carter Nelson, right? Was a tight end, moving to wide receiver. You got him involved a little bit in that UTEP game. I think there's going to be certain players and certain things that Colorado's defense is going to key in on. And you're going to see big plays down the field. You're going to see big plays made by maybe not the stars on this team. Maybe not the Thomas Fidonis at tight end. Although, even if they do clue in on their wide receivers, I think the tight end could certainly have a big game. Like, you talk about mismatches. You know, Thomas Fidoni, I think, is a mismatch not only for Colorado, but I think for a lot of teams that Nebraska is going to face this season. So I think you're going to see the depth on display at the wide receiver position. I think you're going to see the depth on display at the line of scrimmage. Like, when I look at Nebraska defensively, when you look at Nash Hutmaker, when you look at Ty Robinson, just those two guys alone and those big bodies, I think they're going to be able to blow up Colorado's offensive line a good amount. Now, Colorado's success is going to depend on their ability to protect Sheduer Sanders. Sheduer was one of the most hit and contacted quarterbacks last season. Okay, their ability to protect them and keep this Nebraska pass rush at bay is going to be key in their ability to move the football down the field. Because if Nebraska can get in the face with that front three, okay, that's the key. I mention it all the time. A defensive coordinator's dream is to be able to get pressure with your defensive line. If they're able to push back and at least shrink the pocket for Sheduer Sanders throwing the football, that's going to be beneficial because they've got very experienced players back there in that secondary to be able to defend this thing over the top. Will Dylan Raiola really emerge onto the national stage if Dylan Raiola is able to outduel Sheduer Sanders, get a victory in this particular football game? Can you just imagine the attention that is going to be on this true freshman after this game? I think he's going to have, at the very least, a good day. I think that this is a Nebraska team that's maybe going to be more focused on being physical and running the football, but I think Nebraska has a very good, I mean, there's a reason that they're a 7.5-point home favorite. And I think a reason for that is the balance of this offense, the balance and depth of this football team, Dylan Raiola's ability to push the football down the field. I could see certain aspects and parts of this game where Dylan Raiola puts together consecutive completions, medium passing, short, long, whatever passing concepts it is. And now, you got guys across the formation, and now they run the football, and huge run lanes open up. I just see a more complete team for Nebraska in this game. And I just, maybe I'm buying in and drinking the Rhule-Aid early in the season, and maybe it's just another year. But I just think there's something different about Nebraska. I think the thing that's different is Dylan Raiola. Compared to other teams, right? Nebraska has had good players. Didn't say great players, but they've had solid to good players on teams these past years. But I think Dylan Raiola and that high level of quarterback play is going to make all the difference, and it makes everything around this Nebraska football team better. This crowd is going to be absolutely electric. I think that plays into another advantage that Nebraska has in this football game. But if Colorado is able to hit 3 or 4 big plays down the field and turn them into scores, they can keep this game close. Sheduer Sanders has proven that if this game is close down the stretch, that he has the ice water in his veins to be able to make big plays and lead winning drives. We saw it early in the season last year. So he can do that. If you contain that star power at the top, I think the Nebraska Cornhuskers come away with a big-time victory in this football game at Memorial Stadium on Big Ten Saturday night. You've heard my thoughts on this gargantuan matchup on Saturday night between the Nebraska Cornhuskers and the Colorado Buffaloes, but it's time to welcome in one of our team experts, Justin Adams, also known as the H-Town Husker from Nebraska Live at the Voice of College Football, a contributor as well to 93.7 The Ticket in Lincoln as well. What a matchup we have here, Justin, this Saturday night. I am so excited. Everybody's looking at Michigan, Texas at noon, but I'm really excited to see what happens at Memorial Stadium in Lincoln. I've been thinking about this week, man. I would just love to feel that energy around Lincoln in that town here this weekend. But here's what I want to start with you on. What's the confidence surrounding this fan base right now that Nebraska can get out of that great atmosphere on Saturday night with the victory over one of their big rivals in Colorado?
Yeah, I think this is the most confidence that I've seen in our fan base just coming into a season in a long time. The energy for the UTEP game, from what I've heard from people who have been in the program, around the program for a long time, even for that game was an energy that they haven't felt in that stadium in a while. And that, just further proves, and then coming out there, Raiola, showing what he showed and, being able to come out there composed, poised, and be able to just kind of sling it, just like he, kind of like he did in high school. It just seemed like he was effortless with the throws and stuff like that. So it seems like the confidence is very high coming into this weekend. One of the things that scares Nebraska fans is when the college football world is picking them to win, because that's when typically things go wrong. So that's the only concern right now, is that the rest of the world's picking Nebraska.
Nebraska, 6.5-point favorites here in this matchup against the Colorado Buffaloes. When a lot of people, you talked about all of those experts picking Nebraska to win, I think a big reason why they expect them to win is because of what's happening in the trenches and what's happening with the Nebraska run game. Man, this running back room can go 4 guys, 4 starters possibly deep in this running back room. Dante Dowdell, the transfer from Oregon, Ramir Johnson, Emmett Johnson, Gabe Irvin Jr. as well. Is there one of these backs defense that really stands out to you that could possibly have a breakout performance against this Colorado defense that has been susceptible up front?
Very much so. I have a ton of confidence in Emmett Johnson. Emmett Johnson's been, my guy throughout the offseason, who I thought was the best running back. He ran, he came up through injuries last year and was able to step up, and even in stacked boxes against an offense that couldn't pass, he was able to roll out average 4 yards a carry and keep that running game rolling. Gabe Ervin and Ramir, of course, went down early in the season. So it was basically down to Emmett, Quentin Ives, and guys like that. And this year, though, we added Dante Dowdle from Oregon, top 10 running back in the 2023 recruiting class. And, he showed himself well in the first game, very physical, very hard runner. He's a big guy. He did have that fumble and didn't see the field after that. So, Matt Rhule's being very strict on turnovers this year. It's not acceptable. And especially in that running back room that's so deep, because we had 4 oars on the depth chart. It was Ramir or Emmett or Gabe or Dante Dowdle. And so I think there's a potential that they could interwork Gabe and Dowdle a lot in this game plan, just because they want those big physical guys to be able to run into that, the heart of that defensive line and kind of wear them down. But I think they're going to, I think Emmett's going to finish the game with the majority of the yards. And I think he's going to be able to spring loose a few times on that Colorado defense. I didn't show really much of a run defense last week.
When I looked at this tape for Colorado when they played North Dakota State, when you think of NDSU, I lived in Fargo, I worked in Fargo. That was my first job for 2 years covering NDSU football. It's as physical, it's as Big Ten-ish of a program, traditional Big Ten-ish of a program that there is at the FCS level. A lot of people, and over the years, that has been a run the football type of program. But you look at what Cam Miller was able to do, throwing the ball, some more spread concepts from this Bison team this year. I think it showed of what Dylan Raiola could do. Do you have faith that Dylan Raiola can spin it to some of these receivers? They can hit some big plays down the field against this Colorado secondary.
Absolutely. And what Dylan Raiola just has to do is he doesn't have to go out there and be a world beater. He just needs to protect the football. And if he can do that and we flow off the running game, his life is going to be made so much easier, because once the offense is balanced out, he's going to have open guys. And we've seen his ability last week to find the open guys and even throw some guys open. When he did, make, an incomplete pass, he typically left it out of harm's way. He tried to fit it in a couple tight windows, but, the ball was never really in danger. And like I said, he was able to kind of throw some guys open and do some things that we haven't been able to see from this team before. And that's really going to put strain on this Colorado defense, because not only now do they have to work against a wide receiver core that has the likes of Isaiah Nair and Jamal Banks, who they didn't see last year, but then you have the guys like, your Jalen Lloyds and all that mixed in there as well. And so it's just going to be very hard, I think, for them to kind of contain both of those. I think they're going to have to pick their poison and try to hammer in and stop one. And I know their secondary has talent and has upside, but they really didn't show it last week. And in the middle of the field, the linebacker, they look kind of slow. Their eyes were undisciplined at a lot of times. And that's going to work in Nebraska's favor schematically, because they're going to be able to dial up a lot of things, NFL style. We have Michael Terry's a 5-star number 1 athlete out of the state of Texas, who commented on week 1, and he said they do a everything NFL style. And that's the positionless 49ers style of offense they want to run. And they're going to really stress this Colorado defense a lot, and they're going to wear them thin, and they're really going to make them step up and have to be physical to have any chance in this game.
Boy, one throw I remember Dylan Raiola making in that UTEP. He's kind of working his way to the left, changes the arm angle. I can't remember exactly when it was or whatever, and he just puts it. He's kind of throwing off balance this way, and he just puts it right there. And I'm like, this is what we need. This is kind of what Nebraska fans really wanted. Let's move to the other side of the football. Of course, the super team at Colorado that they've assembled at the top with really those players, the Sheduer Sanders, the Travis Hunters. You could throw in Jimmy Horn as well. Nebraska needs to be able to slow that down. I talked about it here just now before I brought you on, that's what they need to really focus on. You can't allow those big plays over the top. Who do you expect matching up with against Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn? And who do you kind of expect to really key in on those guys to try to limit what they can do?
Yeah, I think, Tommy Hill, of course, is our number 1 corner. I think Tommy Hill is one of the most slept-on corners in football. He last year, coverage-wise, he had 10 sacks. 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 He had 10 s he graded out with the likes of Kamari Lassiter and Kool-Aid McKinstry in terms of his overall coverage grade. And he was top, 15 in that category. And now he's put on 20 pounds, so he can also run stop. He can be physical. So he's going to be that matchup with him and Hunter is going to be very interesting. Hunter is, a generational talent. I won't deny that he is one of my favorite players to watch in college football, albeit he does play for Colorado. And Sheduer is excellent. Horn's excellent. I'm not taking anything away from those guys. But, with John Butler, our defensive back coach now coming in from, the Buffalo Bills, I think we're going to have a good game plan to really work on that. Marquez Buford and Malcolm Hartzog, Malcolm Hartzog is going to be out there, trying to kind of bracket these guys as well. I think they're going to have to do a mixture of man and zone. Yeah. And, the thing is, too, the rover, Isaac Gifford, is going to be very, very important because his job is all over, right? Gifford's the all-around type of guy, and we really need him to be locked in, which he is probably one of our best defenders, not in the defensive line-wise. He's going to be huge in this game to kind of be there, in the middle to kind of help bracket some of these, these routes across the middle. And really, the Nebraska's 3-3-5 defense and the 3-3 stack is designed specifically for an offense like Colorado. You remove a defensive lineman, replace that with a defensive back so you can keep up with the team's speed. And I think that's going to be a huge benefit this weekend.
I'm very curious exactly how they defend, and you kind of mentioned some things, man versus zone, and who's kind of going to be matching up. I remember on Sunday night watching that USC-LSU game, and I'm like, man, these LSU receivers are getting over for these 10 yards a pop, 12 yards a pop. But as I kind of watched that game a little bit more, and I'm like, Danton Lynn is kind of a genius. He's not letting anything over the top. And that deep ball down the field and those big explosive plays is really what drives Colorado. I'm very curious to see how Tony White might scheme some things up to keep everything in front of this Nebraska defense, make some tackles in open space, and that could certainly propel Nebraska to a victory. What would a win in this game? I mean, there's so much attention. There's so much hype coming into this game, and these are maybe games in the past where Nebraska has fallen a little bit short. What would a win in this game say about this program and where they're at for this season?
I think this is the type of win, even though, albeit it's a 4-win Colorado team, right? I just think the hype and the fact that it's, NBC national televised game, primetime, all eyes are going to be on this. Nebraska hasn't won a game like that in so long. And I think it doesn't matter the opponent. I think just winning a game like that, especially in a rivalry game that's expected to be close, I think that changes the entire energy and feel. Like we saw how kind of the media started to really come around in Nebraska after the week 1 win versus UTEP. Now, if they go out and they, handle Colorado, if they cover the spread, Raiola mania is going to take off, and Nebraska Husker mania is going to take off, and we're going to be that annoying team that everybody is going to like to hate again. Because, we're going to be insufferable on Twitter. The fans are going to be insufferable, but it's going to be massive. It's something that this program has needed for the longest time, and I think it cements that Matt Rhule is the guy. And that I think, I heard this somewhere else, and I agree. For Nebraska to prove that they've taken that next step, this is the type of game they have to win this game. They need to win this game to prove that this team has kind of turned that corner.
Insufferable on Twitter. You said it. Not me. The Husker fan here said it, not me. So we'll see what happens at the end. Can't wait to see this one go down on Saturday night. Justin Adams from Nebraska Live at the Voice of College Football, as well as 93.7 The Ticket in Lincoln. Thanks for joining me.
Appreciate you.
Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about some underrated games. Now, I didn't include Oregon's matchup against Boise State because I wanted to feature it here at the end of the program. And to dive into Oregon's performance last week against the Vandals from Moscow and now against the Broncos from Boise, we welcome in Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck as a part of the On3 network. And Justin, when I really start to dive into the last 2 weeks, right, against these Idaho schools for the Oregon Ducks. Let's go back to last week. And, of course, everybody's talking about maybe the struggle that they had. You look at the scoreboard at the end of the game, and it certainly wasn't what people were anticipating, of course, coming into this matchup against FCS Idaho, 7th-ranked FCS Idaho, by the way, when we talk about that. But when we're coming out of that game, we're talking about the offensive line, right? This was considered one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten Conference, and you saw an Idaho team that was able to go toe-to-toe up front front, maybe the run game didn't get going as much as Dan Lanning would like it to in that particular matchup. What, from your eyes, what do you think was the main issue? Like, what was kind of your evaluation of why what happened on Saturday against Idaho?
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I kind of feel like the team sleepwalked a little bit, right?
Yep.
One of the folks in our Twitter world, in the Oregon Twitter world, kind of tweeted about varsity blues, right? And they walk out the next morning, they're all hungover. That's kind of what the team looked like. So, and here's to kind of take it a step further. If you go back and you look at the game, you could see that Dan Lanning had a very limited game plan, which you would expect, right? They weren't going to open up the playbook. They kind of figured they'd be able to beat Idaho. They still beat them. The starting linebackers for Oregon played virtually 0 snaps, right? I think the team kind of picked up on some of these things. There was a heavy rotation as soon as the game started of the 2 deep unit on defense almost the entire game. So I think Oregon felt like, hey, look, we should be able to cruise through this game. And I feel like the team kind of picked up on some of that, which is not what you want, right? Dan Lanning obviously ripped them a new one after the game. But to take it a step further, I'm not going to sit here and discredit anything Idaho did because they played really sound football. Their defense returned basically everybody from last year except for like 2 guys that didn't start. And those 2 guys were transfers, guys who'd played a lot of football. They played really good, sound, fundamental, frustrating football, right? And, I think you take a look at that, and that's, if I was Coach Eck from Idaho, like, hey, let's just try to keep this game in reach. Let's not let it get 40-0 in the second quarter and not have a chance. Let's get this thing to halftime and maybe see that we still have a shot here. And I think he did that. Oregon shot themselves in the foot with a ton of turnovers, right? I mean, turnovers in the red zone. I think 6 of the 7 penalties were on the offensive line. So it was just that game, right? And so, now, of course, and I know we'll talk more, is that game, a reflection of what this team will be moving forward, or is it an anomaly? So I guess we'll find out this week.
So let's talk about this week a little bit, right? You got 1 win over an Idaho school, looking to become the Idaho State champs by beating Boise State, a team, I know this stat has been thrown around ad nauseum all week, the team that Oregon has never beaten in their history. And when you look at this Boise State team, Ashton Jeanty, of course, one of the best running backs in all of college football. You talk about the linebackers that didn't play in that first game, right? That group needs to be good to be able to really be impressive here over against this Boise State team. What kind of a test is that not only this Boise State run game, but really this Boise State team as a whole for the Ducks this Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, again, kind of like Idaho, they're another sound football team, right? Jeanty is a rare breed. That's a dude. That's an NFL guy. Dan Lanning's even noted that, said this is an early NFL round guy. What did he have? 6 touchdowns, I believe, last week in the opener for them. It was Georgia Southern, so we'll see if the step up in competition is going to be a little tougher for them. But yeah, Oregon's going to have their hands full. The bright spot, if we're going to take away from what was a very average or below average performance against Idaho, was the run defense for Oregon was phenomenal. And again, that was Idaho. They didn't have a Jeanty back there. Totally get that. But I believe Idaho was under 60 yards rushing for the game. They just never got going on the ground. So I don't believe Oregon will keep Boise State under 60 yards. But my belief is this. For Boise State, the engine for them offensively is getting Jeanty going, right? I think, quarterback play is okay. Their passing game is okay. But if they can keep moving the ball, set up, second and third and short, get themselves in those situations, it's going to keep their offense going. So if you're Oregon's defense, you want to limit that. You really want to try and do your best to stymie that and basically put the ball in Maddox's hands and say, hey, you beat us with your arm. We're going to take our chances here. So I think that's the game within the game there for Oregon defensively. Jeanty's a dude. And again, I think their whole offense gets going when they can get 4 yards, 5 yards, maybe 6 yards on first down and give themselves those second and third and shorts to kind of keep their offense going.
So we talked about the offensive line before and that struggles. And, you look at Jeanty on the offensive side of the ball. They've got a pretty good player coming off the edge. Boise State does in Ahmad Hassanin coming off there as well. How do you expect Oregon's offensive line to fare with him and really this entire defensive front for the Broncos? Do you expect improvement certainly this week?
That's the key for me, right? I think, the offensive line, we'll call it poor. They performed very poorly in the first game. Let's call a spade a spade. They returned almost everybody from last year, mixed and matched a couple things, had an injury to Bedford, who was a starter last year. He probably will play this weekend, but he's certainly not going to start. I think that's a guy you want to get him out there maybe for a few reps and knock the rust off. Should be able to be fine without him. So assuming we don't see him much and pretty much the same offensive line as last week, I just want to see improvement, right? I'm not looking for this to all of a sudden become a stalwart and them not to make any mistakes. They had a really bad week 1. I just want them to have a better week 2, right? And it wouldn't take much. Even if you just eliminated the penalties from what they committed in week 1, it would be a better performance. What I'm really looking at, and I love that you bring it up, Boise State's got an elite edge there. He's going to come off and create all kinds of pressure, and Idaho was able to sack Dylan Gabriel 3 times, which, frankly, we didn't have 3 sacks last year with Bo Nix in the entire year, so kind of a new thing for Oregon fans this year. Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly are both NFL caliber guys. Cornelius is probably an early NFL guy from most projections. So, Oregon's going to have their hands full. I'm sure they'll move him around. Keep in mind, Dylan Gabriel is left-handed, so that does change things a little bit. I'm sure Boise State will mix up some things because of that as well. So, yeah, that's a matchup. I said this on my message boards. The Oregon offensive line isn't going to go from poor to stellar in 1 week. Can they just take a step forward? And then you've got Oregon State in 2 weeks. Can you take another step towards them? And another game you should likely win. And hopefully when you enter conference play with UCLA in 3 weeks, you're clicking a little bit better.
I mean, you talk about this pass rush. It'll be interesting because you've got Michigan later on in the season, really good pass rushers. Ohio State later on in the season, really good pass rushers. So you mentioned improvement. Just got to see that incremental improvement against Boise State. Justin Hopkins, Scoop Duck on 3. Check out his coverage over there. Justin, thanks for joining me here today.
No problem.
All right, that is Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck at On 3. Always great to check in with the folks over there at Scoop Duck. So that'll wrap up another edition of Big Nation. Kind of went over the 1 hour time here today, but that's fine. Had a lot to talk about here on Thursday's show. Gonna have reactions on Saturday, a lot of them. 3, maybe 4, definitely. Texas and Michigan, Iowa and Iowa State, Nebraska, Colorado, TBD on Illinois and Kansas as well. Enjoy your Big Ten Friday and Saturday. We will see you on Monday, recapping and reacting to all things week 2 around the Big Ten Conference. So until then, have a good one. We will see you in the next edition of Big Nation.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.